want to acknowledge the land upon which we stand today, the lands of the Anishinaabe, the Innu, the Anishinaabeg, and the Dakota Oyote, as well as the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We stand upon Treaty 1 territory today. This project also took us to Treaty 2 as well as Treaty 5 territory. Our drinking water today comes from the Shoal Lake First Nation in Treaty 3 territory, and our hydroelectricity is sourced from First Nation communities along the Nelson River in Treaty 5 territory and the Winnipeg River in Treaty 1 territory. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. And really important, I think, to acknowledge the input that we received from Manitobans, including Indigenous Manitobans, and the importance of that, as Trish and Heather will be highlighting in a moment. I also just want to take a moment and thank the team. So this is a collaborative project with the Manitoba Eco Network, as well as the Public Interest Law Center and the University of Winnipeg Department of Geography. So unfortunately, Katrine DeLay at Public Interest Law Center is busy in a hearing today, so she's not here today, but definitely want to thank her. She was key and important to the project. Obviously, your two presenters here today, Trish Fitzpatrick, professor here in the Department of Geography at the University of Winnipeg, and the Manitoba Eco Network's own wonderful Heather Fast, our Policy Advocacy Director, both of them being the lead authors of this report. Of course, but it takes many more hands than that. Back in the corner there is Scott McCullough at the University of Winnipeg, who helped us with a ton of the layout work and getting the report ready and print ready. We also, Guy Jourdain and Hannah Sinclair Huberdeau both helped with French translation work that we've done. You'll notice we have some of our fact sheets out there part of this project, including a select number in en français. Also want to highlight Alex and Sorsha in the room here today, and the rest of the Manitoba Eco Network team helping us to have the event work out, as well as Hannah, who's out front guiding people in. Also, we had a number of other research support, so it included Michaela Carlson, who provided project and workshop support, also research support from Maureen Friesen at PILC, Pavel Shetra at PILC, Michael Bagmary from Manitoba Eco Network, as well as workshop note takers Victoria Klutis and Janessa Schechter. So it takes many hands, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but really want to acknowledge everyone for that. And without further ado, then I will turn the presentation over to Heather and Trish, who are much smarter than me and will do a much better job presenting report findings. Thank you. Oh, sorry, there was one last thank you I forgot. The nearly 500 Manitobans who reached out and engaged on our survey. So I want to make sure I don't forget them, because that was very important in what this project's all about. So thank you.
Thank you, James, for the introduction, and Marcel for the song and for the prayers that really opened us up in a good way. We're here today to talk about something that might seem a little dry. It's impact assessment, and yet I'm surprised at how often my day starts lately with stories about impact assessment at either the federal level or the provincial level. For those who don't know, impact assessment is a way to think about a project before you decide to put a shovel in the ground or make it happen. It's a way to, well, the analogy I was thinking about when I was walking to work is I don't leave the house in the fall, being a Manitoban, without listening to the weather and figuring out what different clothes to wear and planning to layer, and sometimes have an umbrella, and sometimes have an umbrella for snow. Or sometimes have snowshoes. That's what impact assessment is designed to do. It's designed to bring together evidence from all different disciplines to talk about what the potential implications of a project could be, and to mitigate or decrease the negative impacts. And so it's important, this project I think has been important, because what we're hearing on the news is that impact assessment is just red tape bureaucracy. But it's actually not. It does a very important thing to protect the environment and people. Next slide, please. So for this project, we really wanted to know what Manitobans thought about impact assessment and what they expected from their process. And so we set out as a diverse team to bring together a number of different projects. So the first thing we did is we looked at what is best practice in impact assessment across Canada and around the world. And we created fact sheets to help the public know how to get involved in the process. We created research memos to help people who are more impact assessment geeks to find out what is going on. And importantly, we did a public survey that we shared around the province to ask people, what do you expect from your impact assessment process? So on the screen, you can see a map, and you can see most of Manitoba had responses. We thought when we designed the survey, we might get 60 people to answer a survey about impact assessment. 420 people started the survey, which is the equivalent of plus or minus 5%, 19 times out of 20. 370 finished the survey, because it wasn't a test, and you did not have to finish. But you can see representation from across the province, which was quite exciting. We then had public workshops. So we had workshops in Brandon and the PAW and in Winnipeg, so we could have one-on-one with people to find out, again, what do they expect from impact assessment? And we had an experts workshop here in Winnipeg. In total, there were about 60 people who came to the workshops. So we heard from close to 500 Manitobans, and importantly, not all of them had been involved in impact assessment before. 43% knew nothing and just chose to respond, had never been in an impact assessment or anything like that. So we had phenomenal results. Next slide, please. And what we heard really counters the narrative in the news. What we heard is that Manitobans expect impact assessment to cover more than just potential biophysical impacts or changes to the environment. They expect it to consider the possible implications of a project on human health and access to healthcare, hospitals. They expect it to address cumulative effects assessment. So cumulative effects, big crazy term, but really it's about thinking about how different projects build on one another. And the analogy that I use is you have a pool in your backyard, and maybe one small child pees in your pool, and that's okay. But when you start to fill up your pool with many people, and you have more accidents, that can become quite a problem. That's a cumulative impact. So my analogy sort of describes that well, but there it stops, because cleaning up a pool is a pretty easy thing to do. But cleaning up the cumulative impacts of how projects impact caribou herds, that's much more complicated. Or cleaning up the cumulative impacts of how destruction of your landscape impacts mental health. That's a huge, huge issue. So Manitobans expect cumulative effects to be involved in our impact assessment process. Everything we asked about, more than 80% of Manitobans said should be included. So Manitobans expect a robust impact assessment process.
Unfortunately, our current impact assessment legislation in Manitoba doesn't meet this challenge and does not meet this standard of including all of those pieces that Trish just highlighted. Despite long-standing calls for provincial reform, including calls from the Manitoba Law Reform Commission and the Clean Environment Commission, among other experts and regulatory bodies, there's been calls for amendments to the Environment Act, which unfortunately has not been substantially updated since its adoption in 1988. We need reforms for many reasons. One of the main messages we heard from Manitobans is that they want to see a strengthened provincial impact assessment process. Our data shows us there's broad interest in participants in improvements that align with best practices in almost every aspect of the impact assessment process, from planning to monitoring to enforcement. Manitobans also want to see protection of the environment and human health now and in the future prioritized. The government of Manitoba, to accomplish this, will need to invest more in the departments responsible for undertaking impact assessment and enforcing licensing conditions if we are to achieve the level of protection that Manitobans expect and deserves. Overall, our data shows that Manitobans have great ideas about the future of impact assessment in Manitoba and are really eager to share their thoughts on how to strengthen provincial protections. So Manitobans want a robust public engagement process. So before we embark on advancing our resource developments and perhaps building all of these new projects we're hearing about in the media, we really need to make sure that we strengthen our provincial impact assessment requirements so that we ensure we are working in the interests of protecting the environment and the people. Our report highlighted a bunch of key themes that we drew from what we heard from Manitobans, along with all of the other research that we undertook. And again, one of the main themes we heard was interest in broadening the scope of impact assessment at the provincial level by expanding the range of potential effects assessed during the process. And again, as Trish already pointed out, we heard a lot of emphasis on the need to consider cumulative effects in particular. We also heard a lot about transparency and accountability and the obligations of the government to protect Manitobans. So again, another key theme that we really heard repeated over and over is that Manitobans want the protection of people and the environment prioritized, even when there is political pressure to improve natural resource developments, which again, we're seeing a lot of discussion about that in the media. So overall, all of these different themes, which I only spoke to a few of, but we discuss at length in our report, highlight opportunities for improving Manitoba's provincial impact assessment process. And Manitobans also had a lot of other great ideas. So again, there was emphasis on cumulative effects. We heard a lot about better incorporation of Indigenous traditional knowledge and the use of intersectional analysis. Workshop participants also spoke a lot about the need to consider if owners of polluting projects can afford to pay for cleanup costs when projects are completed or abandoned.
So we have 3 main recommendations stemming from our work. And the first one is that the province should engage with Indigenous right holders to identify meaningful reforms to impact assessment and a process to move forward in updating the Environment Act. Second, we recommend that the province meaningfully engage with the public to hear about what they think is important in terms of public interest and environmental impact reform priorities. And that leads us to our key point is that we do need to reform the impact assessment process in Manitoba, and we should develop and introduce reforms based on what Manitobans have to say. There are many ideas and options for reform that can be drawn from the data we prepared, and we're happy to engage further with the province on any of the topics discussed as it launches its public process, fingers crossed. But we're saying the government of Manitoba needs to step up and ensure that provincial requirements are strengthened. Manitobans want to make sure that we minimize any negative social, cultural, and biophysical impacts of new developments. There's also a need to ensure that all levels of government are working together to ensure efficient and effective impact assessment. And that's our presentation. I've never been in a presentation, except for answer questions.
I'm gonna field any questions from the audience, so please feel free to jump in with questions. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for the comprehensive presentations. Just for a little more clarification, based on your findings, what do Manitobans most wanted to see change in the current assessment process?
The current assessment process is quite narrow in the scope of things that are typically considered in an impact assessment or an environmental assessment. And Manitobans want that broadened. Manitobans expect the government to consider all the potential impacts on people and the environment. And so our process needs to be revised to ensure that happens automatically and is not a one-off that may occur if a project goes to a formal hearing body.
Back there.
I was just wondering, you know, with the whole topic of cumulative assessments, right, what's to stop the government from sort of assessing the province for cumulative impacts to decide ahead of time before lands are prospected or designated and companies are already involved in looking at projects from doing this outside of, you know, what usually happens is that the assessment starts when someone prospects or wants to explore land. What's to stop the government from just sort of getting on with this now, so that we're not in this situation?
Well, different practices across Canada actually integrate a project-specific impact assessment into a more holistic process. Then it starts with land use planning and regional land use planning. And so that takes time. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do cumulative impact assessment on a project-by-project basis, but you're right, we should think more regionally about identifying priority areas for protection for moose or priority areas for protection for water as part of land use planning. And then once we do a regional assessment of that information, we can identify a cumulative effects system that can then be plugged into subsequent project-specific impact assessments. Oh, my answer was filled with jargon, so let me know if I need to define anything well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for all this work. I'm wondering how your recommendations have landed, or how you expect them to be received by government, and like what's the state of play on revisions to the Impact Assessment Act?
So the Manitoba Eco Network's been engaging with the Department of Environment and Climate Change for at least 4 years on impact assessment reform in various contexts. I think we have a good relationship, and there's a lot of interest from not only the decision makers, but the actual people on the ground in the department doing the work in incorporating some of these new ideas. So I think there's an appetite and an interest in learning from what we've heard from Manitobans and also drawing from the best practices. So I think we're hoping to hear an announcement of ideally a public engagement process happening soon is what we would like to hear. But in terms of any formal timelines, that's not something we've been given, but we know there's been ongoing work in the background and interest. So I think, as always, we're optimistic, but I think hopefully there'll be some good community conversations in the next while that we can all add our pieces to, and we'll be happy to share our findings and work with community groups as well who want to add their own perspectives to the conversation.
I was blown away by, I think it was 48%, I was blown away by that, I think it was 48%, is that correct, of individuals that responded did not participate or engage in any impact assessment. Was that correct? 48?
47, yeah.
47. Can we assume it's because they are being negatively impacted from our current act?
I actually would assume that it's great that they responded, because often people hear about impact assessment, and if you've been part of a process, you have some emotions about that. If you haven't been part of a process, I didn't think we'd capture their interest. As an instructor at a university, I find that many of my students start by thinking if an impact assessment has been done, then the project is good to go. It protects people and the environment. And so I think that our data sort of backs that up, that people had expectations about what impact assessment did, and they have expectations about what it should do. So I'm not sure that non-engagement is the storyline. The storyline is that even if they didn't know about impact assessment, they had expectations, and their expectations are not met by our current act.
Correct.
And if I could, I think one of the other things too that was interesting, Trish, was that those that actually didn't have experience with impact assessment actually expected more in terms of robust review and a thorough review than those that had experience, which then I think goes to some of the lack of the trust in the process, and the need to rebuild that trust.
And that's where I'm coming from. So it was interesting when the 47% hadn't been engaged. I'm just wondering, gosh, and we see the negative impacts out in the bush from when I was a kid to now. Thank you for this work. Let's hope that it continues on and it's accepted and heard by our government.
We need people to be loud as
You
calling
got
for the
it.
change and calling for the consultation. Nima, I think you're next, and then James.
I just, just talking about that, we have a lot of jurisdictional issues, right? Because we're dealing with section 35, which has been downloaded to the province, and as far as I'm concerned, it's not an adequate process either. And I'm hoping that, somebody's having some input into that particular process. But, I'm thinking we need an ombudsman for, all the different jurisdictions that we can just go to and talk about, because we have one for children, and we have one for, the elderly, and we need one for the environment to be able to sort this out, because it is very confusing. Like, you've been involved in this, intimately for many, many years, and someone like me coming into your jurisdiction to move, to try and figure out where I'm supposed to go, what I'm supposed to do. I don't know. Anyway, I know an ombudsman has a different set of responsibilities, but it just seems to me that there's a lot of jurisdictional issues when you start working with MACC, you start working with city, you start working with other pieces that could be helped by that. The other piece is that is there anything to look at prospecting being communities being notified when prospecting happens? It's been 6 years that my house has been prospected for a gold mine in the river in front of me, and we have yet to hear anything as a community.
So to respond to your first point about ombuds persons, independent oversight is a theme that we highlight repeatedly in our report. It's also having an independent environmental ombudsperson is something the Eco Network's recommended in other reports as well. So I think it's actually a great idea and is something we see in other jurisdictions, like at the federal level. Also was one previously in Ontario. So great idea, something I think we should pursue, and something we've heard from people is an interesting idea. And in terms of the prospecting and claims and that whole situation, again, I don't have any answers for you at this moment, but we've heard repeatedly that that is an area that community members are very interested in. So we are working on, as you know, trying to do some dedicated work in this area, and that kind of the things that happen at the front end, the exploration, that's something that has been emphasized to us as needing more research and understanding of how that all works. And better communication with community members. So no specific answers, but I think both of those things are issues we've heard repeatedly from community members, and the transparency piece definitely is reflected in a report, and the Eco Network and me in particular, they kept looking at me because they know I love the idea of an ombudsperson and I talk about it all the time. So
Environmental commissioner.
Yeah, environmental commissioner. So yeah, definitely on board with that. And it's something that is actually contemplated in the law in other places in Canada even. So
And the
great
free,
ideas.
And the free entry challenge. I haven't seen a court challenge go through Manitoba, but there was a decision in British Columbia to pull back on free entry and change it so that consultation was required with nations. There was a similar case going through Quebec. There was a case that was going through Saskatchewan that I have not, checked the update as the status of that case. So it's mining being provincial jurisdiction. The rules differ depending upon where you are, but we're seeing changes happen incrementally, and so having a call for changes here in Manitoba is really important. And Manitobans, as is clear from our opportunity to listen to you and hear from you in a variety of ways, you're very smart about what is needed. You're very clear on your expectations, and so communicating that with your elected officials, with the media, with someone who knocks on your door wanting to be elected. These are all very important things that you can do in op-eds in the free press. This is one jurisdiction where op-eds in the free press really and letters to the editor really seem to drive some of the talking around what happens at the legislature. So keep advocating for what you're advocating for, and do it using the tools that you're doing.
I just want to add one thing on Trish's point. One thing that really struck me is, as you know, you see our research memos as part of it. So we reviewed academically best practices throughout the world, internationally, across Canada, and throughout the workshops and hearing the questions today, people repeatedly suggested those best practices. So like people know the academic knowledge, they know what's needed, and so I think that was a really impressive part about what we found through this study.
Because people who live in their environment, who've been there for generations, see the changes. You can see them. So the farmer cares about the earth. The nation has a relationship with the earth, and so you know very, very well what's at stake. And so just a strong thank you for sharing your passion with us, and hopefully we did you service by preparing it in a way that people can hear about, again, how smart Manitobans are and how passionate you are about protecting people and the environment.